Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Above the Haze. I'm Eric Postout, Whole on Law Partners. With me today, Shane Pennington, partner at Porter Wright, cannabis lawyer, and someone that is just a wealth of knowledge. Shane, thank you so much for being with me today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I've been doing this podcast Above the Haze for a few years now, and one of the great benefits to me is that I get a world-class education every time I bring someone on who's been doing good work in the industry, from the operational side and the legal side and so on and so forth. So you need no real introduction to the audience here, but I appreciate you're one of the few folks that I actually truly follow. And when you do stuff out there, I want to take note of what it is you're doing. And I kind of want to just explore a little bit of why and how you got to now, and what is it about the practice of law and in particular the cannabis space that got you so interested that you've put yourself out there in this seemingly controversial area of law.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And I follow you as well. So the feeling in that regard is mutual. Yeah. So I didn't intend to, I never set out or had any inclination that I would be doing what I'm doing now when I got started. But it went like this. Basically, I'm going way back, but you'll see why. I'm a preacher's son. So my dad is a United Methodist minister. And so that's what I was going to do when I grew up for a long time. I didn't have lawyers in my family or know anything about law. Then I went and took a bunch of philosophy classes in college, decided I was agnostic and had to change course. And my whole life, everybody had told me, well, you should be a lawyer. You're a natural lawyer. That's what you should do. But since I didn't know anyone who was a lawyer, that never resonated with me. And I was always going to be a preacher anyway. So I just ignored all that. But then when, the bottom fell out from under me because of Friedrich Nietzsche and others, I decided that I needed to think of a new path. And so, much to my father's chagrin, at this first fork in the road, I went and looked into law, and I actually worked for an attorney who was doing appellate law at a big firm. I started at a traffic ticket docket, actually, in a county courthouse, and thought, I'm never doing this. It was horrible. Right. And then someone told me, that's not all that lawyers do. There are lots of different. And so anyway, then I made my way, eventually. Took a long time, but I eventually, had the opportunity to work with an appellate lawyer who was an up and coming, he was like a mid-level associate at the time at a big firm. And I saw what he did and I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. He was writing really sophisticated arguments, really analyzing difficult problems. And so I was lucky that he kind of took me under his wing. Then, you fast forward, I went to law school. I clerked for 3 federal judges. And my whole time doing that, drug policy isn't even on my radar. I mean, I'm aware of it, but it's not on my radar. I mean, I'm just trying to do appellate law. That's what I wanted to do. So I came back, I clerked on the DC circuit, which is important because that is the court in the United States that sort of specializes, I guess it has a bulk of its cases deal with federal agencies and, sort of how they run our lives and challenges to their decisions. And so that gave me a real window into federal regulatory issues and litigation. And then I came back, worked for that guy who is now the head of the Supreme Court practice at that firm. And I just like to pause here just to acknowledge something. I'm sorry, this is kind of long, but
that's okay. I like it.
It's important to me to be able to, I don't give credit here. First of all, I'm very grateful to him, and his name's Aaron Street. I don't know if he wants to be associated with me anymore, but I think
gratitude is never out of fashion. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and I mean, he still sends me a Christmas card, so I think I'm still welcome at the Christmas party if I were ever in town. But in any event, he really was a great mentor and a great boss and a great teacher for somebody who did not have a legal background. And it's important for me personally at this stage to acknowledge that if I weren't in the position I'm in with the maybe the skin color and socioeconomic class that I had, would I have ever gotten that job out of college, being able to work at a big law firm? Would I have ever been able to connect with a guy like that? Not to say he wouldn't have, but just would the chips have fallen that way for me? Would I have been able to go to a top law school? Could I have, just a lot of things had to fall into place. And so I feel very lucky to have had that training because it's been instrumental. So I just wanted to pause and say that.
Yeah.
After working at a big firm for a very long time, doing Supreme Court work, appellate law at a high level for Fortune 500 companies, etc. I ended up getting a pro bono case with Dr. Sue Sisley of Scottsdale Research Institute. Um, she had applied to be able to grow her own cannabis to supply clinical trials she was trying to do to investigate the potential medical utility of cannabis for treatment resistant PTSD in veterans. And DEA just had sort of ignored her application. They requested applications and then they sat on them for years. And I told she was looking for somebody to take her case on pro bono, and I told her I was willing to do it, but the chances of us winning in a posture like that were very, very slim because it's a unique situation where, well, it's not that unique. This happens all the time, but if you are familiar with administrative law and federal litigation in this area, you know that if the agency comes after you and gives you a ticket or strips you of your license or seizes your land or something like that, you can challenge that. But when they just don't do anything because they're busy doing other high priority stuff with their limited resources, courts are very reluctant to come in and say, agency, stop all the stuff you're doing that you think is important and instead make this person's problem your priority over everybody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can happen, but it's very rare. So anyway, I told her that. Cutting to the chase here, we ended up winning that case and actually a series of cases. And along the way through that process, I learned about the Controlled Substances Act, federal cannabis policy, sort of the anti-science
Yeah.
irrationality of it. And at that point, I became obsessed and decided to leave what I was doing there and kind of do drug policy
I wanna
as much as
continue
possible.
on that. You became obsessed. Why though? I mean, there's so many places in American law that don't make any sense, but why did you become obsessed at that point with what was going on in drug regulation?
I think I think for a number of reasons. One is you're right that there are a lot of irrational nooks and crannies out there, but I would put this one up against pretty much any of them. I mean, it is really, really, really crazy. And it's crazy on multiple levels. And it's crazy in a certain way where my skill set that I developed in these very different areas was uniquely urgently needed to be
Yeah.
able to address those problems because they are problems that are the creation of very nerdy administrative law uh, phenomena, right?
Mhm.
Run completely amok, like the craziest poster child of problematic agency action over an extended period of time. And unlike in other areas where you have really, really powerful industry lobbies and powerful interests sort of disciplining the agencies, because if you think about just take any other, like if you take the renewable fuel standards, right? Well, those affect refiners and they affect the automobile industry and they affect all sorts of very powerful industries. And so those industries hire very, very sophisticated lawyers, teams of them. And anytime renewable fuel standards come out, the agency has to watch its back and it gets all sorts of feedback. It gets taken to court by Sierra Club on the one side and the industry on the other. And
So
you
they're
can't have
more
anything.
mindful.
Exactly. Because it's, when the cat is away, the mouse will play. And
Hmm.
DEA has been playing in this area and running, fast and loose, running roughshod over all the normal, legal requirements for a long, long time. And it hasn't had any pushback because there was no legitimate industry of any size to be able to discipline them. And when I saw that, it immediately was a target rich environment to me. And I knew that what I had trained for and what I was good at was uniquely needed. And so that is something, if you've ever been, anybody who's had the experience or knows someone who has been at a big law firm, or where you're on this team of like 10 lawyers, all of them are good. All of them are competent attorneys, right? But the chances that you at the bottom of that totem pole are ever going to get to be running point on one of these projects is infinitesimal. right? For a number of reasons. I mean, it could happen, but it'll be a long, long time, and you know, it's just very difficult. Whereas here, I knew I could immediately jump in and start doing real, meaningful work, and that was something I wanted to do because I think you get better by doing challenging things, right? Things that actually stretch you.
Yeah.
And so all of that put together, it was something, it was just, I couldn't resist it. It was the problems are incredibly complex. They're very important. They affect people's real lives.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cookie cutter for my skill set.
I love that. And it resonates deeply with me. I mean, one of the things, I love the cannabis space. I love the creativity of it. I love the entrepreneurs and where it's going. I think it's a wonderful plant with magical properties. And I think it's got a really tortured history over the last 100 years. The thing that drives me in that space and in other spaces are the underlying social issues.
Yep.
The idea that this plant has harmed so many people, not by virtue of the plant's properties, but by virtue of the governance over it that has made it illegal and then punished people for working with the plant, consuming the plant, so on and so forth,
Yep.
to a point where, in my work and in federal litigation on the criminal side and medical licensees, it's an oppressive system that you can just see. You see the way that the DEA treats citizens, and there's a lot of financial aspects to it and civil asset forfeiture and things like that, which is a weird scenario when you have regulated and licensed industry. Now you still have this money grab situation that's going on and has been going on for a long time. But those underlying social issues, the ability to actually work on things that might change the way we do business here in this country and in fact globally, that's what keeps me going. And I'm glad to hear that was kind of resonating with you and that you saw that your skills and training could be impactful here, because it's much bigger than marijuana, as you know.
Yeah,
it's about the relationship between the citizen and the state.
And it's the relationship between the state governments and the federal government, and the relationship between international law and domestic criminal policy in the United States, which is now dictated by, a treaty championed by Harry Anslinger in 1967, designed to prevent state legalization from happening, which is an absolute anathema to fundamental constitutional norms that protect individual liberties, that reverberates far beyond cannabis. And now, as a result of that and our inability to be responsible with the constitutional system that's given us liberty for hundreds of years, we now have manifest lawlessness across the country, sponsored by and profited off of by the federal government that we pay taxes to. And all of it is driven, the only way it works is through these lawless foundations. And then built upon that, it took decades of anti-science policies, robust, on their face, like explicit anti-science policies. I mean, this goes back to things like Galileo, right? And like the Dark Age, and these should be things that you should never see, right? And so now we have a presidential administration that's focused on science and data-driven harm reduction approach to drug policy. And everybody can be criticized. There's always more to do and so forth. But it gives me some modicum of hope that looks like, because of the work of so many people along the way, and now all of the hard work that we're doing now, that we might be about to turn the page a little bit.
Well, you see, it's those things are happening, and those are positive. And we'll get into the incrementalism in a little bit, but you still see this deeply conditioned response mechanism throughout the system. I was just at a committee hearing in Maine, addressing some legislation there yesterday that's addressing hemp products and cannabinoids derived from hemp, which is a whole other ball of wax. But the language that comes from that is the conditioned fear language, the dangers of THC, We don't want kids to have it. Yeah, I get it, all the normal things, but the fundamental misunderstanding of the plant and the dangers and the inability to see the obviousness of compare the properties of a cannabis plant to an alcohol beverage, to the pharmaceuticals that we're overprescribed in this country. Where are our priorities, and why are we fixated on continuing to, use the Anslinger messaging that has been, you know, completely disproven with real science over the last couple of decades, and some good
Yeah, I
work.
mean, you can take fairy tale stories like, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and we read a lot of, it gets me back into children's stories and nursery rhymes. And the
It's the
other night
best,
we were
right?
reading, what's that?
It's the best.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, but it's amazing. Like, it's amazing how deep this goes. Like, the emperor's new clothes. My 5-year-old
Yeah.
understands that intuitively, right? How ludicrous this is, for someone in power to use their power to just foist an illusion onto the public that's beholden to them, right? And even a child in the story can see that this is absurd. And we
Right.
are at that point. We are at the point now where you can debate how things ought to be regulated. You can debate how dangerous things are, because the fact of the matter is we still don't have the research that we should have, because again, the federal government
That's
blocked the
right.
laboratory door for
That's
50
right.
years.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you have a prohibitionist mentality getting in the way of fundamental sort of constitutional norms and
Well,
enlightened thinking, right? It's
it's
just
detrimental to the whole system. Why do we have a proliferation of conspiracy concepts and things like that? Because we're lacking in trust in the foundations of government, that what it's doing is on the benefit of the citizen and is truthful and is based in fact and reason. And
no.
when
I
it's
mean,
not, and when you can see that it's not consistently at a high level, and there's harmful effects of it that are harming communities across the world,
yep.
of course there's going to be mistrust, and of course that kind of mindset's going to permeate elsewhere, because how can you trust anything coming out? And you
And
could
one thing
see
I
that
think
in the
that's
COVID
happened
response.
that we don't talk about enough is, we know that there are like actual harms from our lack of knowledge and our lack of ability to regulate, and to have just a market that isn't inflated, inflating prices of regulated products with 280E
Right.
tax burdens just creates the illicit market that the prohibitionists say that they're trying to get rid of. And it's just facially absurd to anyone who's ever even thought about economics briefly at any point in their life. But putting that aside, it's just, it's the fundamental thing to me that we don't talk about is, we all want like a call memo. We all want DOJ to, don't have keep enforcement a low priority. Let's like have it illegal, but don't
Right.
just as long as you don't do anything. And I get that. Obviously, I don't want the federal government to come and start enforcing these ridiculous laws. On the other hand, what people don't talk about is the damage that it does to have a whole system of laws on the books that make no sense and that aren't enforced, right? The rule of law requires laws to be law-like on
Yeah.
some level. And it's one thing to talk about a prosecutor exercising discretion to bring a case or not. But when you have entire swaths of law that Congress keeps telling the federal government, you may not enforce these laws, you can't spend any money to interfere with what the states are doing, but we're still going to criminalize it. We're still going to pretend that it's drug
Which,
dealing and that these
which
people are drug abusers. And if they present that medical marijuana card at an academy, we're not going to let them exercise their Second Amendment right to defend themselves in their homes, even if they were veterans,
Yeah.
even if they bore arms overseas and put their life at risk to defend the country. Still, they're a drug abuser, put it away,
Yeah.
right? That's insanity. It is not law.
And it's disparate impact. At the same time, you can have a $1 billion publicly traded marijuana multi-state operator and people getting arrested for the plant.
Yep.
That can't hold up. It's
And of
incoherent.
course, we could go on and on about this, right? But everybody who's listening probably already is on with us on these points. But that's what got me into it. I mean, if that doesn't, and I'm not even, this wasn't even an issue for me until, very late in life. And it's not because I'm, personally attached to cannabis from my backstory. I mean, I wasn't.
No, I get it. Yeah.
It's from seeing the lawlessness.
And that's where I want to kind of navigate us next. You know, your approach, and you and guys like Matt Zorn, I really appreciate the way that you guys are pushing the buttons. You know, your letter to the DEA on the seeds and the less than 0.3%, which opened up Pandora's box. So I attribute all of what's going on in the world in hemp to you. But uh, uh, beyond that, though, you guys, the way that you're going after specific agencies with FOIA requests, making them do their job, making them look at these things and challenging their basic starting points, I think has borne some fruit, and I think is part of the broader mechanism of change that's necessary, though incremental and too slow for many people, which we'll talk about last. But is that something that's like by design? Like, using your background, and is this like, let's push here, let's push here? How are you strategizing, and what have you found to be the results of kind of your broader approach?
Yeah, I mean, certainly by design, but we can't. I mean, look, Matt in his public persona will say things, online about I take all credit for this and I'm the guy who beats the DEA. And I mean, he deserves credit. I'm not trying to say that there's nothing in it. It takes work and you have to be able to do it. And he's very good at what he does. But I think he would also, if you talk with him, every bit of our playbook is just exactly what has always worked to make change happen in seemingly intractable backward policies in the United States forever, right? I mean, if you go back, I don't want to put us in the same group, except I'm trying to give credit. I mean, Thurgood Marshall is our, you know,
Sure.
our guiding light. I mean, we're trying to do what he did, and we're doing a poor imitation, but we're at least we're doing it right. And what we're trying to demonstrate, I guess, is a couple of things, and you've already hit on it. One is because the cannabis industry, it's not just cannabis, it's controlled substances generally,
Yes.
right?
Yes, of course.
All of the folks who get it have gotten that knowledge and know what they know precisely because they have avoided the federal government and avoided interacting with these agencies. They have like buried their head in the sand, understandably, forever, and that's how they've survived, and that's how they've gotten where they are. So here come these guys saying, no, we need to go confront the bully. We need to get out there and just thumb our nose at them, and not just thumb our nose, but just, we're setting the building on fire, bro. Like we are here. You want to talk about a DEA raid? We got a new version
Yeah.
of what DEA raid means, right?
Get me
And
fired
that's
up.
what we want to do. And people are hesitant to ride shotgun with us because, like, who are these guys and why would we do that? And it's too, it's funny to see people who are very, like, it's interesting because the people in the cannabis industry, these are risk taking people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in this place. But even they have limits and they don't want to interact, in some of the ways that we are sometimes. But what we're showing is that if you want to have an effective movement, it can't just be lobbying, and
No.
it can't just be the media side and the economic side. It has to be all fronts, and there has to be. If you look at any effective movement in history, it's always had a legal wing, right? And that's part of it. The analogy that we like to use is chopping down a tree.
I use the
We're
same one.
because this is a tree.
Yeah.
Prohibition and this policy is not a thin reed. It is a deeply rooted, firmly implanted thing
Yep.
that is buttressed by stigma and a whole host of intertwined laws that no one really fully even is aware of, right? And so to get rid of that is not something. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, well, if I just deschedule, then it's over. And that's absolutely false. That wouldn't, it would be great. I would love that, but that wouldn't get you to the end point. It's going to take chopping. It doesn't matter how strong, the lumberjack is. He's got to chop multiple chops before that big tree eventually falls. And so what Matt and I are trying to do is chop,
Yeah.
right? And we are definitely by design constantly. We're trying as much as possible to show that this is absurd and make these agencies talk about it. Because if you let them just sit there, then they can pretend that it's not happening. But if you make them say, hey, it's true, right, that cannabis seeds are not marijuana, correct? Not a controlled substance, right? It's true that psilocybin spores are not a controlled substance, right? You know, and what are they going to say? No. Then you sue them. So they have to say yes. And then you just keep doing that. And then Matt's like, oh, you want to leak this thing to the press, but you don't want to give it to the people who need it to prepare for the reform. You want to get all the smoke for doing this thing, HHS, but you don't want to actually reveal to the people what you said. That's not okay, because we have a law called the Freedom of Information Act, right? And they still ignored it. So and Matt sued him immediately, you know, and that's the kind of, why wouldn't you? You know, if you are enraged by this, like, there are ways, there is law, right? And you can use it. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate to people, because where we're going, where we're headed, it will require litigation. Like Schedule 3, if that happens, do you think Kevin Sabet and Smart Approaches to Marijuana are going to sit on the sideline and be like, oh, well, like, no, they're going straight to federal court, right. You know? And the question for all of you out there is not whether you're going to pony up the money to hire Matt or me or both of us. The question is, are you going to hire somebody better? Because let's not get it twisted. You know, we're good, you know, and I think we could do a good job, but there are lots of good attorneys out there. There's enough room for a lot more than just us to be doing this work. And thank God for, you know, the boys lawsuit and all of that. There's starting to happen, you know?
Yeah. And I think kind of what I'm hearing from you is this accountability campaign. And you know, that's what our system really is designed to do. And folks like you are out there doing that. So you did talk about it, reschedule, deschedule. You know, I think I've seen some posts lately and I've commented on some things just talking about, you know, I'm a very pragmatic person and I accept victories and then I continue to push forward. And if they were to reschedule to Schedule 3, though it's highly inaccurate, you know, all you have to do is just put it next to the drugs that are Schedule 3 and say, this still doesn't make any sense. And you don't have to be a scientist to know that. Right. But it's movement towards something that is better than what it is now. Or am I wrong? Because a lot of advocates out there say it's deschedule or bust. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I agree with it, but there's a lot of passion there. What do you think?
So I think you have to look at, I mean, you don't have to, right? You can say deschedule or bust and get some likes on LinkedIn or X or whatever platform you're on. And it won't be popular at a party to speak the practical truth about this. But the practical truth is descheduling is simply not on the table in this administrative process. It's just not. And I won't get into all of the reasons, but let me just say to anyone listening, anyone watching, I will publicly debate anybody any day of the week on any one of these points. Okay. I'm so tired of people saying things in a safe place. Right. So if I could you know, use a little bit of French. I'm from Houston, and there's my favorite hip hop group growing up was UGK, the Underground Kings, and there's a guy named Pimp C, and he's like my you know, it's Bun B and Pimp C. And Pimp C said, "Folks like to talk a lot of shit in a safe place, right? Yeah. But they can't look me eye to eye when they in my face, right?" And that's how I feel about this. Like, please, if you disagree with me, I'll be respectful, right? I will be civil. I think I'll persuade you if you talk to me about it, because I know what I'm talking about on this. So here, you can't deschedule in this process because of the treaties. Until that treaty provision, which is statutory, is fixed, the DEA's hands are tied. They can't just simply deschedule, because if they deschedule, they would lose jurisdiction over cannabis. If they lose jurisdiction, they can't ensure treaty compliance. So it's not really feasible for them to deschedule.
And you're getting some complex, you know, constitutional stuff here. And this, whether the United States really should be beholden to a treaty, an international treaty like that.
And Matt and I have written a law review article explaining why that provision is unconstitutional. And if DEA were to use it to keep cannabis in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, then we would be prepared to sue on that ground. So it's not that I think this is just.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, there is literally a 0% chance that DEA could successfully deschedule right now. Like, if they did, they would immediately be sued. And, you know, there are a number of barriers beyond the treaty, but the treaty is the main one, okay? And so that's point one. Point two.
Yeah.
I understand deschedule or bust in the bigger picture, right? I also am a champion of descheduling. I don't think that cannabis belongs in Schedule 3. I don't like prohibition at all. Here's the reality, though. The underlying assumption of the deschedule or bust camp is that descheduling is somehow accomplishing this dramatic long-term goal that we all have, and Schedule 3 is not. The reality is, Schedule 3 is doing a lot more than people realize, A, and B, descheduling would not actually accomplish what they think it would. Because as everyone, you remember when the president granted the pardons on October 6, 2022, and everybody just attacked him relentlessly, pointing out correctly that not many folks are in prison because of federal cannabis violations of simple possession, right? Which is what he pardoned.
Right.
There were very few of those. That's right. You know why people are in prison for cannabis? It's because of state law violations, in large part. Mm-hmm. That is the main thing. And guess what? Descheduling is not going to fix those state prohibitions. I know that there are triggering laws. People talk about those, but I've studied those and I know those states. I'm from one, and it is not as simple as people think. So even if you got descheduling, not only would you still have the state law prohibitions, which would probably get more severe. I mean, look what's happening in Texas right now, right? They see something moving, and in a prohibitionist state, they're going to ratchet it up. Just like when immigration policy goes more progressive, Republican administration at the border will then come in and ratchet down on the immigration laws in their state so that they can, say, well, we're not going to let the, progressive federal government stop our border policy. The same kind of pendulum reaction will happen with cannabis if you were to deschedule. And last, I could keep going forever about it, but you don't have interstate commerce if you deschedule. It's not as though you get cannabis out of the DEA's jurisdiction and suddenly the federal government's cool with it. Far from it. You have the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which makes interstate commerce in cannabis, which qualifies as a new drug under that statute. It's illegal unless cannabis is approved by FDA for interstate commerce, which it never will be, ever, because it's a plant. So even if you descheduled, cannabis would still be illegal at state and federal law, and it's not possible to deschedule in the administrative process. So in the long run, whatever we get out of this process, we're going to have a lot of work to do. That's the truth. And I am totally here to join hands and fight with every one of the deschedule or bust camp right now while this administrative process is pending and after. But notice that what we're doing is we're fighting each other.
Right.
And remember, I talked about Thurgood Marshall, and I talked about social movements and how they work. And I'm not trying to tell, there are people who know more about it than I do, but no one can deny that the number one thing that the enemies of progress do, their number one tool in their toolkit, is to divide the champions of progress. Go into the camp of the reform movement, divide them against each other, get them to debate each other, and sap their power. That we're falling for the number one trick, the easiest, most obvious thing, and we're falling for it as a movement, and we've got to knock it off, right? We've got to stop it. It's just ridiculous.
It's a good point, and I want to kind of close this out with just your thoughts on something that my friend Rod Kite came on and talked about, which was he thought that the real push right now in the single plant movement was through the Farm Bill and through the hemp side, and that had a lot more potential traction than anything going on in regulated scheduled marijuana. Do you think that there's reason to kind of push in that direction, or do you think that this is while that might be good, we really have to continue this fight on the scheduling side and kind of free up the full plant?
So I think in the end, we're going to have to regulate it rationally, which means not regulating the same thing, pretending that it's two different things in a radically different way. this is another way that we've divided ourselves, right? And I understand both sides of the argument. I respect Rob Kite very much. I, you know, I get it, right? I get it. But however you slice it, at some point we're going to have to all recognize reality, just like the federal government has to, and we're going to have to stop fighting this ridiculous battle between cannabis and hemp when it's cannabis, right? But it's going to take a lot of time because of the economic forces that are in play. What I would say is, it is true that there's a lot of progress to in the recognition. It helps, just like bringing up the absurdity of the seed situation, or the FOIA situation, showing that hemp is legal, and having HHS say in their analysis, like, look, there's a bunch of intoxicating hemp products out there that are totally legal, and they're skewing our analysis here, and we're not talking about them. It's like this huge footnote, like, none of this makes any sense. That we're even, to your point about why it's in Schedule 3, right? I mean, it doesn't. What I think we have to be careful about is, I don't think hemp is going to ever undo all of the vestiges of prohibition. The process of moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and us learning as a movement that that's not going to solve all of our problems, but learning that it's going to solve many, and bringing the key decision makers at the federal and state levels, who are still, some of them are from an older generation. They still have these stigma tainted views. We have to slowly unravel that. And it can't be done simply by driving a truck through a loophole in the Farm Bill. Like, it just can't. It's not to say that that's not progress. It's to say that there's utility in demonstrating or showing our work, right?
Yep.
Being like, getting HHS to say, like, hemp, for all of its progress, did not convince HHS to say in a publicly facing official document that cannabis has a currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States. It didn't get them to go gather the state evidence and to recognize the legitimacy of state regulation that is the whole foundation of legalization, in this country. And so I guess what I would say is, it's not an either or. Rod is correct in my mind that it is eventually leading to the streams have to merge.
Yep.
But the process of merging them is where we have a lot of work to do. And that is going to educate the key decision makers so that we can eventually have rational policy. I guess what I'm saying is, there's no shortcut here.
No.
Not for the deschedule or bust, not for the hemp crowd. We just have to walk. We can't go around Mount Everest. And we can't pretend that we can, especially when we're about to summit. We're almost there, and then we can start the work of moving on, which, even once we get over Everest, we still have a long way to go. You know what I mean?
Right.
But goodness gracious, would it be a disaster for us to get distracted right here, right now, and drop the ball? It's just, we've got to avoid that.
I hear you. I'm of a mindset of I like flooding the zone. And I think,
love that.
I think that the work going on in hemp, the hemp products, regulated hemp products, consumer safety should be everyone's, goal. We care about what happens to the consumer, and responsible, reasonable regulations are not the enemy. But I think the work that's going on in all the different agencies can lead to something more coherent in the future, and certainly with the work that you're doing out there. Last thing, if you could, choose one word to describe, your impression of where things are at and where things are going and how you feel about, the situation in cannabis, what would that word be?
I'm having trouble picking a perfect word. The thing that seems closest to me is fluid.
Fluid.
Everything is fluid right now.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a huge opportunity, because it's almost like somebody came and we've had the board, sort of arranged, the table arranged with DEA sitting at the table and all of us, stuck in the back for a very long time. Somebody came and just threw it all up in the air, and we're all like, and we're watching everything kind of, cascade, and how's it going to fall? And, I think for people like you and Matt and me and many others, we see that as a huge opportunity to seize our destiny and to grab the reins at a historic time and to just never let go,
Mm.
right? That's the instinct that I think those of us who have sightlines, that we're lucky enough to have the training we have, to have all this, we see this, in front of us. And I think that that those who haven't seen it yet or who have been distracted by the misinformation are still in a reactive posture. They still think that they're defeated, and they don't yet see that there's a sliver of light there. And when you are in the situation that we've all been in, when you see a sliver of light, you've got to just go, right?
Amen.
You just have to go, and you can never ever let up. And so that's how I see it. It's fluid, and I don't know. I can't. You and I and no single person or group of people can make this happen. It's going to take all of us, as it always has, to sort of keep moving in that direction. And I guess, to me, it's fluid like lava, where it's flowing down the mountain and it's eventually going to dry and harden, and it's going to
Yeah.
be rock again. And the question is, where will we be at that point? And I don't know the answer to that. I have ideas, but I know that we're going to need to all do our part.
Amen. There is a preacher in you. I can certainly feel that presence coming through, and very appreciative of the work that you're doing, and appreciative that you came on and shared some of your thoughts with us. Shane Pennington, thanks for coming on Above the Haze. Tune in next time, folks.
Thank you.